The states of Minnesota and Illinois are fighting back against the Trump administration's escalating deployments of immigration agents and officers to their cities. This is a look at some demonstrations out of Minneapolis just moments ago. Both states now suing the administration, alleging unlawful and dangerous tactics are being used by some federal agents. The president this afternoon now saying that his administration will withhold federal payments to those states and others like them.
Starting February 1st, we're not making any payments to sanctuary cities or states having sanctuary cities because they do everything possible to protect criminals at the expense of American citizens, and it breeds fraud and crime.
And joining me now is Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. And Senator, it's always good to see you. Thank you so much. You have knowledge and experience on a lot of the topics that are front and center in the news. And I wanted to, at first, ask you about what you make of that threat from the president affecting your home state of Illinois.
Well, he's made this threat against all sorts of Democratic-led states, not just Illinois. This is what tyrants do. This is what authoritarians do. They try to silence their critics. They try to make sure that nobody will stand up to them. And we're not afraid of Donald Trump in Illinois. And in fact, we pushed back pretty hard against ICE. And it was because of the citizens of Illinois exercising their First Amendment rights in a peaceful way. And all of those people who went out and took pictures of ICE agents abusing their power, that we were able to then present evidence in court that showed that ICE continued to lie, even in court, when they say that protesters were being violent or that the ICE agents were doing something that was within the scope of their authority, when we actually had video footage showing that they were very much abusing their authority. And we're going to continue to stand up to tyrants like Donald Trump.
One of the levers that you have in Congress is funding the department that puts these officers and agents in the field and backs the policy. And some of your colleagues have talked about withholding that funding as one tool. And Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey is one of those. Let's listen to what he had to say.
It's malpractice for Congress to be funding an agency that won't even submit to basic accountability by answering basic questions. It is fundamentally malpractice. It is a surrendering of our constitutional role and responsibility.
And so do you support that idea of upholding funding as a way to address this?
Well, Congress has the power of the purse. And unfortunately, though, regardless of how we feel about it, the Trump administration is ignoring Congress, and my Republican colleagues are allowing them to do that. They've been doing an end run around Congress in all sorts of ways. What I am deeply concerned about, what I have been asking for, is how are you training these new ICE agents? You're paying them in Minneapolis, for example. My understanding is they're providing them with a $250 per day per diem for these officers. And they're hiring officers with lower standards, people who can't pass the basic English test, people who can't pass an open book test. I want to know what kind of training they're providing to these officers, because I frankly think that law enforcement officers should be held up to the highest standards, should get the highest level of training, and that we should fund that. But I don't know that the Department of Homeland Security is providing that to these new ICE agents. I think that there are well-trained ICE agents, that there are well-trained DHS officials, but those people are becoming fewer and far in between, because I know that they're quitting because of how Kristi Noem is running the department at this point.
And what I hear in your response is that you don't think that using a legislative tactic of withholding funding for the department is right at this time. Is that fair?
I think it's more nuanced than that. I don't think that you just can cut off funding completely. But what I want to do is, what kind of training are you doing? They have to answer Congress. And yes, maybe we hold the power with the purse at some point. But right now, we need to see what is happening. ICE agents have shown a repeated pattern of violence and lawlessness in Illinois. The killing of Renee Nicole Good in Minnesota is an alarm bell that ICE must be reined in to protect the rights and safety of our communities. We have to hold them accountable. We're doing that by the lawsuits that the states of Illinois and Minnesota are pushing forward with. But I, as a member of Congress, first and foremost, just want answers. So what kind of training? I watched that officer who shot, Renee, and his actions were not anywhere near in compliance with the standards that we would train officers to.
Because of and there's so much to explore on that issue, and the lack of ability to have an investigation that includes the state of Minnesota is certainly an issue. Let me turn to Venezuela. I don't want to not have this conversation with you, given your military experience, because, of course, the Senate is talking about a resolution, and tomorrow, as I understand it, is the final passage on the War Powers Resolution, which could attempt to block further military action unless it's authorized by Congress. And a number of Republicans did join in this, and the president then went on and placed phone calls to them to pressure them. What is your sense of where that stands right now, and is it likely to have an impact?
Well, I think the Trump administration is trying very hard to intimidate my colleagues who stood up for the Constitution. Look, our Constitution is clear. Only the American people, through their elected representatives in Congress, that's the members of the Senate and the House, can authorize a president to engage in acts of war. It entrusts them with this solemn responsibility because it is the American people, not any single occupant in the Oval Office, who will be forced to live with the consequences of those decisions. And so, this is not just about Donald Trump. This is about any future president declaring war. The people of the United States of America, Donald Trump won the last election. They voted for him because he promised that he would end forever wars, that he wasn't going to get us into any more wars. They voted for Donald Trump to become president of the United States, not the acting president of Venezuela. He campaigned to bring costs down here at home and getting our nation out of those forever wars, not into them. But his actions in Venezuela proved that America first, according to Trump, is basically BS. He clearly cares more about trying to run a foreign country than the nation he was actually elected to lead. That's why this vote is so critically important, because we have to rein in this administration. But it's not just about this administration, it's about future administrations as well.
And it's a real tension point. I'd like to also ask you about your colleague, Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. He is suing the Pentagon over the Secretary of Defense's efforts to reduce his military rank and pension. And as a reminder, this was perceived to be punishment for Senator Kelly filming a video telling service members not to follow unlawful orders. And, of course, you are a veteran. We thank you for your service. And what do you make of how this is playing out for someone with the kind of record and history of Mark Kelly in the Navy?
Well, it's wildly inappropriate, dangerous, and I mean, it's flat out wrong for the Trump administration to go after political critics like this, let alone heroes like Senator Mark Kelly. I mean, Mark has earned his rank and retirement from 25 years of service in the United States Navy. He's an American patriot who's always put democracy first and has always supported our service members and the rule of law, something that basically neither Trump nor Hegseth can say. And this is what tyrants and this is what authoritarian regimes do. They try to silence political critics, especially those who sacrifice for their nation. This has no place on a democracy. Think about it. If they can do this to Mark Kelly, an American hero, an astronaut, a man who flew combat missions, multiple combat missions, what message this sends to the American people? We don't stop them. It tells the average American that, hey, if they can go after Mark Kelly, they can come after you. They're going to come after you and your neighbors. So you better shut up and let this president get away with whatever he wants to do. And we're not going to let that happen. When I served in the military, when I declared my allegiance to the United States and I was willing to die for this nation, it wasn't for any one president. It was to defend the Constitution. And the most patriotic thing you can do as an American is your First Amendment right to speak your mind. And they're attempting to stop that. And they're trying to go after somebody like Mark Kelly to shut everybody else up.
And that is being tested in many ways. Thank you for spending time with us and giving us your views. We appreciate it so much. Senator Tammy Duckworth.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.